Hello, everyone, and welcome to Handmade Hero. We're going to start off a little bit differently. We're going to program normal Handmade Hero in a couple seconds, but someone was asking on the pre-stream about whether we had a bug in one of the memory things, and we might. There's a couple things that could easily be bugs that would have slipped past us. We haven't done any hardening really of most of our stuff. So I just want to go look at it, and let me explain really briefly what the problem was. So if we go to Handmade Hero here, if I jump down to the place, this is sort of a little bit tricky because it well may not be a bug of ours, but we don't know yet, so I just want to look at it really quickly. What the person was talking about in the pre-stream was they were trying to run Handmade Hero through an address sanitizer. Now, what an address sanitizer is it's a piece of static analysis and dynamic analysis, depending on which ones you're talking about. There can be a mix of both. Code that looks at your program and tries to determine whether or not you're doing any kind of illegal operations with memory that just don't show up because they happen to work, right? So, for example, a pretty classic one would be you freeze some memory, but then you still use it after it's freed. Because that memory is usually just going back to a free pool, you would never know, right? And so it's just a bug that's waiting to be exposed by some changes to the application. Like maybe then later you change it so someone allocates something there, and then you end up in a situation where you've got that use after free suddenly causes a crash or causes a bug that you didn't know you had because before no one was allocating it in between the place where you freed it and the place where you used it. So that's like a classic case of something you might find with an address sanitizer, overwriting a buffer like by 1 byte or something, so that it's overwriting, but it doesn't matter because there's room, there's pad at the end because of the way allocations work. They work on 4K pages. That won't crash, right? We've done some stuff that we can use to detect some of those things, although we haven't done it particularly stringently yet. So, those might be less likely for us, but still not really because we didn't really do the stringent version of it, which we'll do probably before we ship. But anyway, in this case, it was a question specifically about bootstrapping. We used the bootstrap call, and this is the equivalent area in the Win32 layer. The person they were talking about it was the equivalent area in the Win32 layer would be accessing info arrow platform in platform open file. So we're looking specifically at platform open file, which is this. Here we go. And what they were saying is that info platform, I think they probably mean result. I think they're probably talking about result platform. This. Oh wait, no, they're talking about this. This is what they're talking about right here. Info platform. So info platform. Info is a parameter here, and it's accessing this thing. And so it might. We have to go look to see whether if we've got something bad happening here with this info platform. Now let's take a look at where that was set. First of all, this is the place where the person said that they were getting an address sanitizer issue. Was this, not this line of code, but this line of code on Mac, right? So either we've got a bug, and we might, or there was a bug in what they were doing on the Mac version of it, but, I just want to take a look at it and then check on stream just to see, I want to help that person out. Anytime someone reports like something where it's clear that they were doing some work on something and got confused, we try to help because, I want to encourage people to do work on their own and figure stuff out, right? So all right, so let's take a look here. Win32 open file, it's using the info struct here that came because back when you started the enumeration, right, it was going to fill that out. So if we had a bug, it would probably be in something like this, right, where we're doing the bootstrap push struct here to get the file group. That info presumably is the thing we're talking about. Now let's open up the definition of these functions just so we can see whether that's actually true, right? So if we come back in here and we take a look at platform open file and stuff like that, we see that there's the file group and then there's the platform file info, right? And so it's the platform file info in particular that we'd be asking about if that's what the address sanitizer was concerned about. And so if we take a look in here where we've got info arrow base name, like this sort of stuff, this is the code that would be suspect. So you can see when it runs, all of this is not really relevant, right? Because all of this code is just doing basic wildcard setup. We then enter the loop where we're going to allocate the information we actually need. And what you can see here is that particular thing. So if we look at info platform, this piece here, right? If you look at that particular thing, where we set the platform is actually a push. At least that's what we're doing here. Is actually a push of this string that's getting copied, right? So it's the Win32 file group memory in particular that's... Puss, what are you doing? What's going on? Come on up. Come on up. That's a good puss. Okay. So what I would say here is I don't see any way offhand. First of all, I don't think this would implicate the stack stuff at all, because, you know, this allocates... well, I guess we can look at Win32 allocate file info and make sure that it's okay. So in order to do this, we grab the platform off of there, we allocate a new struct off of the Win32 file group memory, we fill it out. I mean, I just, you know, just looking at this, everything comes off of the file group memory. So I don't know. I don't see any way this could be using stack memory. I don't know. Like, do you see what I'm saying? Everything here is allocated off of that memory block. So I'm not sure what would actually be a problem for a address sanitizer there. I don't really see anything. So I kind of feel like maybe we would need more info, or maybe it's just something that you did weird in the Mac version. You know what I'm saying? Does that help at all? Do you have a follow-up to that? I'm just going to wait 1 second while we look to see if there's a follow-up comment at all on it. But just looking at the code, it all comes from that memory erase. So I'm just not sure. I'm not sure how that would end up with a stack pointer to anything, really. I'll just wait a couple more seconds, see if there's any follow-up to it. And then we'll switch over to working on the variant stuff. Working on the variant stuff. All right, maybe I'll just continue then. I don't see a follow-up to it. Maybe I'll just continue and we can take that offline. All right, there was a sticker on the bottom of my chair this entire time. Let's throw that away. And then we'll, oh, okay. All right, they said they'll check it out again and add some more detail in the forums if necessary. Okay, that sounds good. Also, if you're working with like a macOS platform layer, there may be people on the forums who use macOS who can help more specifically as well, right? Like, you know, we don't do a Mac platform layer here. We haven't done one yet. And so, you know, the best people to help with a Mac platform layer are going to be people on the forums anyway, for what it's worth. You gonna look out the window, Prime Puss? Do you want to? Why don't you go in your cat tree? Why don't you go in the cat tree? Okay? Let's go in cat tree. That's a better place for the prime puss. Here. You can still look out. You can still look out. Look. Yeah, there you go. There you go, see? Alright. I think we've gotten the prime puss into position, so now we can go ahead and do some programming. Okay. So let's go ahead and move to the thing that I was going to do today, which was take a look at our problem with variance. So let me explain what this is. If we jump into the game here, let me just load it up. So if we're in the game, and we go over to some place that just has some variance in it, right, that we were looking at. So let's take a look at this, for example. What we were doing is we were saying, oh, let's put some trees in here, right? And, you know, we haven't actually bothered to mark up the trees yet, so they're like the wrong size and stuff like this. But is there a reason I can't? Oh, there we go. So if I select like one of these, you know, what we would normally be doing is we'd be saying like, oh, okay, you know, that one's got like the size and stuff specified. This one needs to have that as well. So we would add like an alignment point here, and we would, you know, sort of size it up to the correct size, whatever we needed it to be, and sort of position it properly relative to, you know, where it was going to be and all that sort of stuff, right? So what we would normally be doing right now is like going through and like prepping all of this stuff. And, you know, like I said, I don't really know how we want to do all this stuff in the future. I should probably make these things so you can drag past the top of the screen there. But anyway, like, you know, we could start going in now and aligning all of our tree stuff and all that kind of thing. And that's the sort of stuff that we will need to do as we sort of build out the world. So all of that seems to be working great. No complaints there. We could stand to improve this editor a little bit, which we probably want to do as we encounter like issues and stuff. But in general, you know, it seems fine. So, you know, this would allow us to get all of our trees in play and make all this stuff work okay. Oops. And set up our alignment points pretty good, and then we could test them, right? So all of this stuff seems pretty good, and I'm happy with it. Like I said, we probably want to do a little bit of work on it and improve the editor stuff a little bit, but otherwise we're pretty good. However, what you'll notice is if we actually look at it, though, this is a random distribution that we were, you know, supposedly random distribution picked of these things, but it's really not that random. Obviously, a normal situation wouldn't be picking from all of these things for the same area, like the snow, you know, we'd have snow-covered ground for the areas with the snow trees and so on. But actually, it's very far from random, and the reason for that is because the way that we're assigning variant numbers right now is based on where you are in the grid squares, which is not what you actually want to do, right? When you're actually picking a variant, what you want to do is you want to select variants based on how many things there were. So if there are only 2 sprites, you want to assign variant numbers to the range based on an equal distribution of 2 things over the range 0 to 1. Whereas if there were 4 different types of trees, you want to assign 4 equally spaced points on the range from 0 to 1. But instead, what was happening for us is if you only have 2 things, it assigns them in the 0 and 1 position of a 0 through 3 distribution of 4 points in the range 0 to 1, which means that everything is skewed towards the second point out of the 2. Because anything that would have picked the 3rd or 4th permutations, which don't exist, will map to that second one. So it doesn't properly cover the range, if that makes sense. And so what we end up with in this scenario, yeah, is kind of a thing that's like totally busted, where picking from a supposedly random distribution is almost always going to pick the wrong one. Or not the wrong one, the same one, right? So there's nothing really all that random about it. You know what I'm saying? And so that was the thing that we kind of needed to fix. And there's probably other bugs in there as well in terms of the assignment and picking of the random stuff. because we haven't really looked at it that much. But that is a big problem that we need to solve before we go any further, because those assignments are just completely wrong. And that's an issue, obviously, right? So we got to fix that. Another thing we should probably do is when we view one of these things, we don't show the tags, but we're probably going to want to, right? So when we look at one of these things, we're going to want to see like what the tags are for any given one of these saucy gentlemen here, right? So that's something we also want to be able to do. Another thing that's a little bit weird is the sizing for these things, right? Like, we probably need to work on the size normalization a little bit more too, because it seems to me like we're maybe, when we extract stuff, somehow it's not filling the box size properly. So like, for example, I don't know. I think we want to like size things probably more manually. What we were doing right now, I think, is maybe recording that size and sort of preserving it, but not preserving the box size. Because you can see like these things that are set to 2.48, they have a really like very, very large box size. Whereas this stuff here has a small box size for the same roughly sized thing. Yeah, it's just a little bit weird. So, you know, if I was to grab, say, this thing and size it up, right? You know, it gets much larger for the same box size. Like, look at how wide it is versus how wide this thing is, and they're given their two box sizes, right? So it's just a little strange, and I'm not sure. I feel like we probably want to fix how some of that's working as well. All right. So let's go into the code here and start to tackle some of these issues. I'm going to open up Handmade Hero, and I'm going to go to, in the import library, the import code, I want to go take a look at how those things are being assigned. And if you look at how variants are being assigned, they use the tag arrays to do that. So there's sort of this like create art star set of things, create art star grid or tag grid that creates the tag grid for importing something. So for example, in the case of the trees, and particles would be the other kind. In the case of the trees, that's the scenery tag grid. And what you can see here is the scenery tag grid tags things based on variant without knowing how many there are. And that would be fine if we knew there were always 4. But there aren't always 4. So just to be clear about what's happening here, and 'cause I haven't drawn on the blackboard in a while, I don't want people to get lost. What we're fundamentally talking about, what's the day? Day 536. What we're fundamentally talking about here is we have variants of the same art asset that want to be picked among potentially randomly, for example. And so we're going to have a range of 0 to 1. And we're going to essentially pick a random point in here, right? So we're going to pick like this point or something, right? This is going to be picked at random. Now, in order to make this actually be random, what we therefore have to do is make sure that we assign a distribution of matching points across this thing so that the chances of you being closest to each of those points is uniform across the interval. So for example, if we only had 1 point, right, then we would know that it doesn't matter where we put it, because no matter where we put it, it would always be the closest point, and you can't pick anything else. So if there's only 1 point, it can go anywhere. If there's 2 points, then we need to make sure that the distribution across this range makes this point be closest to either of the 2 points at random again, right? Now that can really be anywhere in the interval here and here, right? So the first point can go from the center point here. We can go out as long as we go out an equal amount it doesn't matter. So for example, we could put one here and one here. We could put one here and one here. And it doesn't matter. As long as they are equally spaced from the center, we will end up with a equal distribution, right? So this is equal distance from center is really our only requirement. That's it. So now the question is, what happens when we get to 3? Because 3 and 4 are also cases that we have. And for particles, we actually go from 1 to 16. So we need to come up with a general rule here. This is not going to cut it anymore because we've got 3 things. And so if you think about how the point for 3 gets distributed, well, what you want to do is actually divide it into 3 equal size buckets, right? So we want to make sure we have bucket 1, bucket 2, and bucket 3, right? We want to make sure that when you fall into each of these buckets, you correctly map to one of these points. So where are they going to go? Well, they're going to go in the center of the bucket, right? So at that point, once we get to 3, there is really only one distribution at that point that gives us what we want, and that is center of 3 equal buckets. Now the nice thing is, as we go up from there, you can kind of see that it's always going to be the same thing. This is going to be the center of 4 equal buckets, 5 equal buckets, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? So we know that what we fundamentally want to do is take the range of 0 to 1, right? Take this range. We want to divide that range by the number of buckets, right? So we want to say, okay, divide it by the bucket number. And that's going to give us our bucket size. And then we want to take exactly half of that bucket size, start there, and then add an entire bucket's worth for the rest of the points, right? So we want to do like half bucket to start, and then plus bucket each time. And that produces exact distribution that we need. So the math is not hard, right? That is very, very simple. I didn't need to really think about anything. You can just draw it out, and you get exactly what you need. For the math is easy. However, that is not our main problem, figuring out the math. Our problem is creating the systemic flow necessary to produce that. Because what we have is we have a grid of things. That grid contains an arbitrary number of sets of variants, right? So for example, in the case where we're talking about scenery, there are 4 rows, each containing up to 4 variants. So when we look, we're going to have a system that looks for groups inside, counts the number of things in that group, and then correctly assigns the variant points to those based on how many it got. Does that make sense? And so that's really the thing that's going to create the headache for us, is putting that system into place. And so if we look at how we're doing it right now, it's not going to fly. Putting in variant tags a priori, right, ahead of time, isn't going to work. So our tag grids are fine, and we can leave them for everything else, but where we put variants isn't going to work. And so what we need to think about here is perhaps the easiest thing for us to do would be to say, for any variant, we need to reassign the variants at the end. You know, so we could still put them in there, but then when we iterate over, maybe we look for variants and reassign them to new values before we export, or something like that, right? Okay, so it's not hard to imagine how we might do that if we knew how many variants there were. While something like the particle grid, which is literally just a grid of 16 possible variants, would be easy. You just count the total number of images that you found inside the PNG, and you're done. We cannot do that, so we cannot do something that simple for the scenery. Why? Because there are 4 different variant groups in the scenery, each of which needs its own count. And so what we have to do is imagine that our tag grids are more capable than they currently are. We will probably have to do something that looks a little bit like this. For an import tag grid, which is this, we probably need to say something like this. Well, I guess we don't really need to do that. We could just do it here. In here, we would say that. So for every tag that's in the grid, we would specify a variant group number, where 0 probably means it is not part of a variant group, and 1 through n means that it is part of that variant group. And there's probably a maximum variant group number, which tells us how, well, in fact, we could just do this. So for each set of grid tags, we would just say, look, how many variant groups are there and which ones are members of those variant groups? We would then go through here and say, okay, for each of the things that has an add tag variant on it, we would not actually build any variant tags. Instead, we would just say, here is where, you know, this particular thing has a variant tag on it, and that'd be the end of it, right? So let's take a look at how that might look when we do the import grid tag stuff. You can see here when we do the end tags, looking at the way the result field works here. I'm going to go ahead and initialize this guy to nothing, just so it'll get a variant group of 0 by default if you don't do anything else. And here, let's see what else we're doing, import body and so on. So I think, yeah, this stuff's all fine. And all we have to do is look for any place that we were doing a variant. And I don't really know whether we want to do this or not, to be completely honest. But point being, once we actually get the tag at the end, we can specify the variant group for that thing. So I'll leave the specification of the variant tag in there, just because. And then for the variant group, I'll say, look, this guy has a variant group of 1 for everybody, because it's the particle tag group, right? There's probably no other variants except for, what, items? Yeah. So this one has a variant group in this case. And, okay, so this variant is based on the row. And probably looks something like that. And so there are variant groups there for cases 0 and 1. And so here we would set the variant group based on that. Finally, for the scenery tag group, it's the one we were actually looking at with the trees. Same thing. We would just say, hey, the variant group for this set here, it's just going to be set to whatever the y index is plus 1, right? It's just whichever row you were on. So I think that's all good. And when we do the variant group count here, we can just set that directly probably for now, but we could auto count it in the future if we really felt like it. But the variant group count here, right, is just, there's just 5 of them, right? It's whatever the y index here was. And the same is true here. And then here, the variant group count is 2. Nope, that's not right. So we can do that. You know what, the other thing we could do is just not bother and just have a call that actually counts it. And that seems maybe better to me. So maybe what I'll say here is, you know, maybe we'll produce this by scanning. You know, we'll leave this for now, but like maybe I'll do like to do scan to compute this value rather than manually setting it. Right? So once we know the variant group count and the variant group indexes, now we have the information necessary to do this, but we're still not out of the woods yet. And the reason for that is if we go into the actual import code for multi-tile export, so it's this one. If we go into the process multitile import code, what you can see here is we're going to pull these things out, and to the extent that we get one, that's going to produce information about how many of these variants there were. So we kind of need something in this part of the code that will actually register how many of these things we saw, right? Now we can do it here, or we can do it elsewhere. And I think probably the way we would want to do it is, I'm guessing when we do the update, metadata, update asset metadata. When we do the update asset metadata call, then when we're looping through these and looking at any individual piece of asset metadata, what you can see in that code is it's going to look to see for any given one of these whether or not there's actually anything in it, right? So I believe, or is it? Oh, it already is. So here it is, right? So what we should be able to do, at least in theory, I think, is for each one of these asset indices, we should be able to go and do a pre-summation, right? Where we look at each asset that was here and we count how many variants there were in the variant set. And then when we go to export these tags, for example, right in here, right? What we could do is just switch the variant tag so that it is now set to the correct value, right? Seems like probably the right solution. Yeah. So anyway, here's the y-index, x-index scan. Here's the asset index that's coming off of it. We're going to need to know this. And we're going to need to know the variant group, right? And so the way we would probably do this is say, all right, if there is a variant group on this, then we're going to update like a variant count for that variant group. And that way we then know like what for any given one of these we're on. We know what the value should be. And so when we're done with that, we can then produce the bucket sizes. So we would basically have the bucket size for each variant group. And does this not, I mean, this should have, I'm not sure why this doesn't have, I guess this doesn't actually use any temporary memory. That's kind of crazy, but it really doesn't. So this would actually need to use some temporary memory, right? Because it needs to precondition those tags. Technically, though, actually, when I'm looking at it here, it doesn't actually need to do that, because we could do a separate pass that does that, if that makes sense. So we could actually do it in sort of a separate way, which is update asset variants, like this. And this one could actually do it. And this would want temporary memory. So this would want to know that it could just create some, because we could just hard code them, but why bother? I mean, why not use a temporary memory set to use them? There's no reason to limit the number of them, so we might as well not. So what we want to do here is say, okay, let's grab this stuff out. We will loop over all of the contents of it. We will look to see how many variants there are for each of these and just summate that. So let me do a push array here. of U32s. And I don't know whether the type comes first or the count. We'll have to look. But what we need to know here is the total variant count, right? Variant group count. So if we know the import grid tags for this thing, which would be this. At least I believe that. No, not, sorry. It's this, the grid. So if we know the import grid tags, like so, then we know the variant group count for that one. We can fast track this. If we know that the grid doesn't have any, then we don't have to do anything. Because if there are no variant groups, then we can't, then there's never going to be any variant tags assigned, right? Because we wouldn't have any groups to assign them to, and that would be the end of it. So what we want to do is say, if there's any variant groups, then we'll make a variant count array. The variant count array will hold, you know, all the variant groups. We could assert in here that nobody did anything untoward. So we could assert, for example, that the variant group count the variant group index that we observed is less than the variant group count that they said there was, so that we know that we don't have a bogus grid that we're operating on. The same thing would go for right here, where we say, give me a variant group count of F32s here for the bucket sizes, and then that'll allow us to properly move everybody. We can also do one for the sort of the point that we're assigning. So that allows us to do pretty much exactly what we want with our variant groups. And once we've summed how many there are, it's a simple matter of looping over them to compute the bucket size. Now we need to, these will get initialized to 0 because push array by default clears. And so when when each of these things gets cleared, it will then sum up. We may end up in a situation where they're, if this is our variant group index, and we're looping over the grid here, we may end up in a situation where there actually isn't, there actually isn't anything in that variant group because the artist just didn't put anything in that whole area. So we need to be able to say, look, whatever the count was when we get it out, we want to set the bucket size to 0 probably, regardless. So don't try to divide by 0 here. Check to see if the count is 0. And if the count is 0, leave the bucket size 0. If the count isn't 0, then set the bucket size to be equal to 1 over the count. Right? And so that way, if there's like 2 things, we get 0.5, which is how much we want for each one. And if there's 3 things, we get a third, and so on. So that produces the correct bucket size. And then at the end, we can go back through everything, looking to see where things were filled in. And remember, well, you know what? We could do this right here as well. When we actually start these out, we want to take the at point. We want to start halfway through the bucket, right? So we want to set our at point to be whatever the bucket size is that we ended up with. And maybe I'll save this value here. Something like that. Let's try size. So I called it size. So we're going to compute the size here, and I should F32 that just to be safe. It would probably warn me. It would say you can't divide because you're going to lose data or whatever. So we get a bucket size here that's equal to this. Then, like I said, we want to start halfway there. So that starts us halfway through that bucket, which is where we'll place the first point. And then each time through there, what we're going to want to do is take whatever that at point was, and we want to add to it, right, whatever the bucket size is. So this is the point that we're at. Oops. Essentially what we want to say here is, here's what we want to set the variant to, right? And let me just go ahead and grab this out. So we want to grab out the variant group index, which we've done. We want to make sure that it's not out of range. We want to find out where we should put this point, and then we want to make sure that the next point that's in this variant group goes somewhere else. And by the way, that should probably just do this. So that's pretty much all we need to do, but we now know the point. We haven't written it anywhere yet. So we need to go through and replace any mention of a variant in this tag set with the correct variant. So in order to do that, we would have to loop through the tags like so. So we would want to do something like this. And we could probably do that up at the top there. And so when we loop through these source tags, what we would want to do is say, if the source tag type is a variant, then we're going to change the value of that tag to be this point, right? And now what we've done is, like, every time before we pass this array down for writing, we're going to do that modification. Now, I'm not super thrilled about it, and I'm going to put a to-do here. Because we probably could clean up the way we're doing these tags pretty easily so that we just kind of like append the variant tag here and stuff like that. And we just did it in a sloppy way. We write all of the tags into the asset system for no real reason. And so I feel like we're going to want to change that in the future. So yeah. And that wouldn't be hard to do. But that's basically what we want. Let's go ahead and fix errors now, compile errors. So if we look at update asset variants, which is the routine we wrote here, it needs some stuff. It needs the game assets, so let's make sure it gets them. And what else does it need? It needs the... what? Oh, it needs the source file, right? It needs this. And then that needs an identifier. All right, so the asset itself here is never actually referenced, but it does need to be. And so if we look at update single asset metadata, in theory that should just be directly referenceable off of the asset index, and that should be the end of it, right? So we should actually be able to just do that. And be done. I think, let me look at the tag here. So that's an ID, and then we're done. So I think that is at least the sketch of the code that correctly allocates variants based on how many we're seeing, which is what I wanted because I didn't want artists to have to do that, right? I want the code to do it automatically. So looking in here, when we're actually doing the update asset metadata, what I can do now is just call this update asset variance call, and then pass it what it needs, which is that, oops, I'm really butterfingery today. That, and this. The temp memory is this. I think that's it. All right. So the problem that we're going to have kind of right off the bat is that I have no way of knowing whether any of this worked. Like, maybe it'll crash or something, and then we can debug it. But let's say it doesn't crash. Did it work? And so I think what we want to do is, because right now I don't have any way of viewing what tags were assigned to things, I think we want to expand the editor to do that. So in the in-game editor, we're going to want to go, and I'll run it first to debug any crashing or anything like that. But after we do that, we're going to have to add something that lets us view tags, because otherwise we're just going to have no idea if this worked, right? We just don't know. And we want that anyway. Like, we want to be able to look at tags for a number of reasons. And so, you know, that's not a bad thing. So if we look at where we actually display stuff in the asset editor, what you can kind of see here is we've got some nonsense going on, and then we add some annotation to it. What we want to do is have a way we can display tags here. So, and that's probably more important than a lot of this stuff, possibly not more important than errors, but, you know, it's pretty important. So what I'd like to do is grab the tag set out of this thing and dump it, right? So if you look at where this, you know, stuff is coming from, you can see we've got the HHA here. So the HHA asset has a tag array built into it. If you look at that struct, it tells us where we would get it, right? It's this stuff right here. So we should be able to do something that right in line lists all the tags that were assigned to this thing so that we can actually see them. So if we go and say, you know, hey, let's get a tag. What I can do is just say, give me the first tag. We'll run through the last tag. And then we can just out of the asset system grab that tag. Now, I think we're calling some kind of a get asset call here. I just don't know if we ever made a get tag call. Let's assume temporarily that we did, even though I don't think we did. Yeah, we didn't. So if we make a get tag call, that will produce the tag for us. It won't be hard. It's literally just an array offset. But I want it behind a function so we can check to make sure people aren't asking for tags that are outside of the tag array. So if we go ahead and get the tag here, what I want to do is take the tag index, grab the tag, look at the ID for the tag, and print that out plus the value. So in order to do that, I'm thinking like probably something like this. Maybe. So we do label F, yeah, like the tag name, which I think is a real string, and then the floating point value of the tag, right? So if we grab the tag like so, we would get the name here, like get tag name or something. We have a function for that, so we'll grab that. And then we'll look at the value of the tag and put that in there. Now, in the file format stuff, we have a way of getting that, I'm pretty sure. Tag name from ID. And that is, you know, pretty nasty. It's a search, which is not great. We could fix that, obviously, by making a lookup table. That is it, I think. All right. So if we take a look at that code and clean up the errors, I'm assuming the only thing we need to do here is implement get tag, because we don't think we have that. And this has to actually be a tag. So we have to cast that to asset tag ID. And then I think we're good. So inside the asset system, in Handmade asset, what we want to do here is go to the get asset call, which is this, and we just want the exact same thing for get tag. So, you know, everywhere we were doing tags here, because I don't think they turn into a tag struct. They're literally just HHA tags. So we would just say, what's the one that you actually wanted? When you get the tag back, it will then check to make sure that there actually are that many. It'll look for them. Oh, God. It'll look for them and return it to you, like so. I think that's all we need there. So what I want to do first, and you know, before we go any further with it, I'm going to test it now. I'm going to comment out the thing that actually does the update asset variance, because I want to see what the values are before we do that. So if we go run the code now, like so, what I want to do is look in here, and I want to go pick something that would have had a variant on it, like this stuff out here. I want to like pick one of these and see what it has. So it's got a variant number of 0.75. It's got a facing direction of nothing. It's got a basic category of 24. It's a tree. It's not winter, dark energy, fall, right? Zero tag should probably get optimized out eventually, but right now the way the picker works is a zero tag means something, so we don't actually do that. But yeah. Okay, so let's look at something that has two variants, because this should help us. So, for example, this is sort of going to be picking one exact case that I expect to see and I want to see it change. So if I go to the source code, the source art assets for the base game, and I look at the tree stumps, which is actually one of the things in here. Those tree stumps, there's two stumps, so these should be assigned to 2 buckets, and it should be like 0.25 and 0.75, right? Is what these two things should be assigned to, right? So that guy should be 0.75, which is what this guy is. What you can see is it's actually 0.25. Now, why is that the case? Well, it's the case because this guy got 0 and this guy got 0.25, right? That's what they were assigned to, which was wrong to begin with, and I think I even made a comment about that separately. But anyway, so what we want to see is that guy get set to 0.75, and hopefully we'll also then see the other stump show up once in a while, because right now it like basically never would, because you have to pick a number that's below 0.1, right, for that to ever happen, because it's at 0 and, well, 0.125, right? Which is much, much rarer. It's like 1 in 10. Although we should still have seen it, so the fact that it didn't pick it isn't reassuring, right? But yeah, anyway. So now I'm going to go ahead and comment this in and debug it and see if we can get that number to be correct, which should be 0.75, not 0.25. So now if I go back and run it, and we go back and look at these things, we can see what did it actually do, if anything, right? So let me go ahead and pick one of those guys. That's not right. So it looks like it worked, at least it did the one thing we expected, which is it set that to be a variant of 0.75, which is what we wanted. It set this to 0.875. I don't know if that's correct. Let's look at what that file has in it. So if we look at this scenery tree here, that's this one. So looking at what that value, looking at what this actually should have been, there are 4 of these, which means the bucket's 0.25, which means that that one should have been 0.125 away from the end, and it is. So it looks like our variant code worked spectacularly well, shockingly enough, which is a bit surprising. Let's see if this guy got it correctly as well. So, yep, there's 2 of those. So that is exactly what we'd expect. And we got both variants of those. Oh, wait, no, we didn't. This is the deprecated evergreen version, which we have to remove at some point. So I guess what I'd say is particularly weird here is we're only ever getting the highest variant. It's as if that value is always set to 1. You know what I mean? But it looks like the variant code, at least now, is working, which is what I wanted. And if we go look at what that room gen code is doing, like, is there something bizarre happening there with the tagging? And I don't know. So if we look at when we place a tree, actually it looks like, that's weird. It looks like we never pick a variant. If we're never picking a variant, I'm not sure why we would be picking the highest instead of the lowest. So we should probably look at why that is. Oh, you know why? It's because we don't care. We ignore that tag if it's not set, I think is how that works. So if we actually set a variant here, how many tags can you add to an entity, by the way? I don't actually know at the moment. 8. 8 should be enough for everybody. There's no question that 8 is the right number. Just don't even talk to me about numbers other than 8. 8 is the highest number. Forget about it. 8's the highest number. Alright, so now we can look and see whether we're getting variants here. And now we actually are. So we can see a bunch of here that haven't had their sizes set yet. Right? So if I like pick these guys, right, you can see that we're picking the various variants. So that was fine, and that's good. But you know, if we wanted these to look properly, they would have to have some adjustments made, like, you know, to see like how big they should be. You can see there's like, so this was one of the reasons we did this test. You can see like the perspective is different on these, and so like this one is probably the right one for us. Even more than that. Even more exaggerated than that would probably be a better perspective, right? Like a more top-down tends to look better for us because of the way the camera is kind of a top-down perspective, or trying to be. But yeah, so, you know, good on us. Happy day. Can't seem to pick that one because, again, the box picking, those boxes are so huge that you can't get them. But it doesn't matter because we can select other things in the box. We planned for this. So I don't know how big these trees should be, but probably something like that. I really gotta have some way of not having that clip so I can just kind of keep pulling on it. All right. Yeah. Oh, there's one more guy. We don't have any way of picking behind the that thing either, which is not great. So yeah, let me go ahead and add some size to that guy. Wonder what we could do about that. I'm not really sure. All right, so that's all good. Um, oh, one more. So, like, yeah, I would consider that problem solved. That was quicker and easier than I was expecting it to be. Um, you can see we've got some art bugs in here, so I don't know if you can see that. I'm going to raid that one. There's like a pink line. Uh, that's actually in the sprite. You know what I'm saying? Um, so that should get fixed. Um, Let me try to rate a reasonable bug on that. So, do we have GitHub? The GitHubs? GitHub. Hey, look, there's like a sponsorship thing. I do find it kind of unfortunate that, like, you know, modern internet companies worth billions of dollars largely were built on software they didn't write, and then they don't pay for them. You know? Which is unfortunate. It would be nice if the people who made the software, like, that powered Instagram, which was largely not Instagram, you know, or something, got paid part of the billions of dollars, right? Like, those people who made all that open source software should all be rich, but they're not. So anyway, inside my projects, there should be, or repository, sorry, not project, stars, handmade hero, issues. I guess GitHub would be another perfect example, right? Anyway, we want to create an art issue here. Oh, and hey, we just finished that. And so what we want to do is create an art issue here that's like a pink line in tree sheet. Part of the template grid looks like it's snuck into the output. I'm going to replace the name tree sheet here with an actual name of the file to make it easier for Anna to know which one we're talking about, so she doesn't have to go hunting for it. So in here, I'm just going to look at which one of these. It was this one. You can see it right there. So it's Scenery Trio 3. And so that'll just be something that gets cleaned up eventually. It doesn't cause us any problem right now, but it's just a little something that needs to get cleaned up before, you know, you were to ship the game or something. So someday it has to get fixed, but it's not causing us any actual immediate issues. I don't know that there's any more of that. There might be. I guess we'll see it. It was nice that it showed up so clearly. So like, hopefully that will generally be the case, where if there's something like that, it'll be pretty obvious to us right away that there was a problem. So, okay. I think that concludes us doing the variant handling there. It seems like we're in good shape. And so I think we probably want to start doing a little bit more in the way of cleanup here. Maybe cleanup of that tag stuff. I don't know if we want to start that now, but we could. And the other thing we probably want to do here is, again, start looking at how we're actually editing and saving those things to try to streamline that process up, like maybe fixing that mouse delta issue there. So, for example, you know, when we're picking one of these, oh, I forgot that I could do this. So I guess we don't have a problem with picking because we can do this, right? I was like, how do we pick stuff that's under there? And I forgot that we like have a perfect debug camera now that can do anything you want it to do. I forgot we got around to that. Um, so I think what I'll do, since we accomplished what we want to accomplish today, we don't have a huge amount of time left, but there's a decent amount, right? I mean, there's like 45 minutes. I don't want to start on ground cover because I want to start on that at the beginning of a 2-hour block probably, because it's going to be a pretty big push. So we'll start that maybe not next weekend because I think I'm away next weekend, but we'll start that in 2 weekends. So maybe let's try to clean up some of our quality of life stuff here, and just say, look, dragging these things is a pain in the poop chute, so we want to go ahead and try to produce some code in the platform layer that will help us be able to do stuff like when we do this, we don't hit the edge of the screen, right? Like I want to be able to just drag that as far as I want to drag it, and I don't want to care if the mouse hits the end. You know what I'm saying to you? So we would like some way of being able to get that. So like basically the mouse delta that's occurring there. And there are definitely some issues with that make it particularly tough to do. And the reason for that is we don't actually, like, we know that a mouse is a differential pointing device. So if you think about what's happening with a mouse, it's pretty easy to say like, oh yeah, let's just use the delta that you moved to adjust the value. The problem is, like, and this is not hypothetical, suppose that, Anna was using this and she's using like a pen, right? Well, a pen doesn't have a delta. You know what I'm saying? So we end up in a situation where I'm not sure that it's like if there's an obvious way to solve that problem by just like assuming that the mouse is the thing that you're going to use. And so, I wonder if we want to do something like create a spinner widget so you can just like drag in a circle or something, because that would work with the pen in the same way it would work it's really hard to say. I mean, there are other ways we could do it too. So one way of doing it is another, like another option that we could look at would be that normally what's going on here is you're picking something, and if I were to size it in here, we would not have that problem. So another way to look at it would be like, okay, if I can add this thing, and then when I click on this, I am in a mode where I'm going to resize this thing or reposition it. You know what I'm saying? That would presumably solve the problem, because then you would be interacting with it where the limits are not relevant to you. Like the reason that we get a problem here is that if you touch that value, you end up manipulating it in a space that's totally abstract and has like arbitrary boundaries. If you're manipulating it here, it would just work, right? You would just be able to do it how you wanted. So I wonder, like, is that a better way to do it? Should we have it so that you click in there and then it uses the projection to properly figure out how much you should be sizing that box, right? I kind of feel like that would have to be the answer. I say? So I guess I don't have a strong opinion on it. That seems like the right way to go. On the other hand, I don't like the extra complexity that it kind of adds into the system, because now you're talking about the code in the game has to have even more garbage in there for, doing the sort of like dragging and picking and stuff and so on. I don't know if I love that idea. One of the nice things about doing it this way is it's totally isolated over in the editor code and doesn't really affect anybody. But I don't know. I mean, that doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do. So maybe we need to just embrace that and just have it so that it it puts that in there, and that way you can just kind of drag these things around like where they live. And then this stuff over here is more just a way of you saying like what you're editing. You can just pick one, you can click on that, and then you can edit that thing, or maybe you just click on like which one of these you want to edit. And then you edit the position and size together, like there's a handle and you grab it or something like that. I just don't know. I don't see anything simple we can do to fix the problem, really. I mean, one thing we could do is just not move them by so little. We could make them move faster, but I don't know. So that maybe isn't such an easy change. So I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm just not sure. Yeah, I don't know. So let's see here. Do we have anything else we can do that's minor? I guess we could do take a look at some of these things that have been reported. Oh, you know what? This is definitely one thing we should do. This right here. Okay, so I'm going to update the complete asset pack so that people can just run directly, since now everything kind of loads and imports properly with no other issues. So what I would like to do is fix our README. All right. So this is now different than it used to be. So the directory should contain at least. Okay. So let's take a look at what this actually should have. So if we go into Handmade, Boopinga, what are you doing? You coming up, baby, or what are you doing? Are you exploring? We got a saucy puss today. You've been on stream all the time, haven't you? Are you coming up? Are you coming up? Or are you staying down? What's the verdict? You're coming up. Okay. So what we want to do is take a look at what's actually going to be in here. So the code directory, obviously, we know about. The data directory does not exist as a thing now, because it will just get created. So what we probably need to do, and in fact that's something that we may need to make sure that our game actually does, meaning our game. What's going on, Puss? We're trying to program. You want the game to be done, right? You're in it. There's a Molly in there. Did you know? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So we want the data directory probably to be created on its own. Meaning, if you don't, so that's something we could do today as well. In fact, maybe that's what we'll do after we finish this. We want the art directory is not a thing anymore. That's going to be sources. Handmade misc is other stuff. That's actually true. And then we've got tags. Bubinga. It's not time for typing. Casey's typing. Okay? You gotta wait till Casey's done typing and you can type later. Alright? You're not gonna code right now. Casey's gonna code. Casey's gonna code. Okay. Casey's gonna code right now. You wanna play with the chapstick? You wanna play with the chapstick? Okay. So then we've got misc, and that should be it, right? Yeah. Does the build.bat file, so this is probably all we really need to do. So we can make this say if not exist, the directory that this is, okay, seriously? Why do you need the chapstick though? Why do you need the chapstick? Do you want to eat it? You want to eat it. Okay. I mean, why do you want to eat the chapstick? It's not tasty. It's not salmon flavor. Okay, so what we want to do here is say, look, we're going to have to make the data directory. So it's going to create w handmade data. And yeah, I think that's all we really need, right? And it'll push that in there. We could have the game put the art assets in the build directory, but I don't know that we want to do that. What are you doing, kid? Okay, now you want to eat the almond biscuit. Are you a hungry puss? What's going on? All right, good. You just sit right there. That's good. That's a good place for you. All right, so yeah, like the handmade data directory we can make ourselves in here. When we actually launch this build, right, we're in the code directory, so we're here. So, right, that's where the build.bat file is. So what we'd want to do is just say, like, look, make a data directory, if there wasn't one. And we can test that as well. So the handmade data directory, so we could say, and when, after you run build.bat for the first time, after you build for the first time, these directories will be created for code for executable and packed assets. Right? All right. So I think that more clearly explains what's going on, and so now I can update those things. Um, and we can probably still call it latest art. I don't know if we should call it like day underscore art dot zip or something. So maybe we'll change to this. All right. Okay. So I think that's probably fine. And we'll pack up art assets as of a particular day. And, you know, you can just always grab the one, like, yeah. You could say this. Unpack Handmade Hero Day blah and the Handmade Hero art into the same directory. We recommend W Handmade. And then what we would say is the art is updated less frequently than the code, so you just need the art zip that is most recent art zip that has a lesser or equal day number than the code zip. Once you've unzipped both zips, the directory should contain at least these things. And after you build for the first time, these directories will be created for the executables and packed assets. To build the game, that all looks good, right? So in theory now, we should be in a place where if I build, it will try to create the Handmade data directory automatically. And let's just see if that's true. So let's suppose that, you know, somebody's downloaded the game for the first time. And so we've got this data directory, and the retired thing, I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of this data directory. I'm gonna cut it though and put it out into a retired thing out here, just in case we want to look at it again. So the data directory is gone, right? All this stuff, it's just gone. So when we go into so here's one thing. I guess that'll get packed up automatically too, so that's all fine. So even the fonts will work. That's kind of nice. Don't ask me what that's doing there. All right. So in theory, when we build now for the first time, it should create the data directory, and then when we run the game, it should build the pack. Let's see if that's actually true. So if I go to Handmade code and I hit build, you know, did it create a data directory? Right? It did. And then if I actually run the game, it should pack everything in there, hopefully. Yep. And that'll take a while. I suppose we should probably put something in there that's like a progress meter. For those people who build for the first time, it's probably pretty intimidating to have nothing happen, right? Yeah, I'm not super motivated to do something like that because it's not clear how you would display the progress meter. You would have to have built a font into the game executable because you haven't loaded any fonts yet. That's the whole point, is you're processing the assets for the first time. So it wouldn't really be super plausible that you would be able to do anything where you could display a progress meter with not actually having a font. I suppose you could just fill a rectangle. That maybe would work, right? Or you do the Windows thing where it's just a little circle that spins around for a long time. So that's looks like it's almost done building everything. Oh, and it is done building everything. And it ran correctly. So hey, good on us. We can do a complete rebuild, and everything looks like it's in place. All right. Okay. So I think that's all good. How much time we got now? Because again, like just whittling down the list of to-dos here, because I didn't want to start the next big thing, and we finished the variant stuff much quicker than I thought we were going to. So need to talk about this was done on day 536. Close the comment. Looks like we've got about 25 minutes left, so let me see if there's anything else I want to do here. Minor issues, naming and returns. We could clean up some of this stuff. Minor issues. Handmade render out CVP, push render target doesn't return a value. Does it never get called? How does that work? Let's go look at these. Again, just trying to find something productive to do without starting something big. So push render target. Does anyone call this? No. That solves that problem. What else we got? The function prototype is out of date in handmade render geometry.h. Ah, yes it is. It's world P from a line. Okay. That's fixed. 2 missed renames in the OpenGL code. We'll look at those in a second. The assert code will be compiled away by Clang. Yeah. It will work if it's cast to a volatile int. Oh, okay. Perfect. So let's do that. That works for me. Create forest. Okay. Create forest is not a thing. Do we call create forest? We do not. So I'm going to get rid of create forest for now because no one's using it. And we will add it back in when we actually have something for it to do. So that leaves just this and this. This is in Handmade Renderer OpenGL. And we're talking about GLX texture sRGB. So I'm not sure I understand. 2 missed renames in the OpenGL code. One info.glx texture sRGB and one info.glx frame buffer sRGB instead of the info.OpenGLX texture sRGB and OpenGLX frame buffer. 1315. So I'm going to have to reread this code to remember what exactly it was supposed to do. So in here we've got, in the OpenGL info, we've got OpenGL-X texture sRGB, OpenGL-X framebuffer sRGB, and OpenGL arb framebuffer object. This one has nothing to do with this RGB. Oh, I see. This code just isn't happening at the moment. It looks like we've turned that off. So, and the reason for that is because we're not doing actual sRGB in our sprite processing, which maybe we should switch to at some point. But in GLX texture sRGB and GLX framebuffer sRGB, these just, we renamed them and never recompiled this code. So it's really just that. And you see the crow? You looking at the crow? Okay. There's a crow outside, and Molly's trying to figure out how to get down there. You can't, baby. Baby, you can't get to the crow. I know it's sad for her. She want to go get the crow. It would fly away. Puss, it would fly away. Go watch the crow. Yeah. Chatter at the crow. Cute noise. And so the same is true here, right? We changed it to this one. So he was just pointing out that we hadn't put there's nothing complicated there. Just he must have tried compiling that path, which we don't use anymore because we use the squared not sRGB version. So I'm going to go ahead and just comment that back out. And so then the last thing was he was asking if there was a way we could have the platform renderer have a pointer back to the platform as necessary. And this is like stuff he wanted, like the X11 information. All right, we're getting a lot of puss tail here. Puss. Okay, so I can try to describe for you the problem that's happening outside. There's like tons of crows. I don't know why they're gathering. They're kind of just hanging out on like a power line, and then one of them's like down on the ground, and they're all just like chilling. And the prime puss is like, you know, transfixed by this. She's like super ready to go down there and catch some crows. Unfortunately, that is not something the prime puss can do. Prime puss is not allowed outside. For safety reasons. Isn't that right, prime puss? Sorry, baby. But as a result, I'm getting the tail like smacked in my face here. Let's try and tuck that a little bit back. Maybe we'll slide the keyboard up here. So this is a pretty reasonable request. There's no reason we can't add a void pointer there to just sit around and allow people to tuck some data in there if they need it. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in here and say, note Casey, this is currently unused by us, but we've added it for other platform maintainers so they can put some context pointers in here for their own use. And so I think that is probably all we really need to finish up this one. So I think we've done all of these. We did that, did that, did that, did that, did that, and that. All right. Okay, prime puss, you can't catch the crows. You don't have to hunch down. Okay, there's a window between us. All right, baby? I can't even get the keyboard now. The prime puss is like squatted onto the keyboard. All right, okay. Here we go. What else we got? So it looks like we've got a few kind of weird ones here that we could look at because we still got about 15 minutes. And, you know, if we don't have something major, if we can't start something major, we might as well try to clean stuff up. This I think we did too. That's been a long time coming. And so now we're just kind of down to this stuff. Prime Puss, what am I? Okay. We need to relocate the Prime Puss. She's freaking out. These headphones are impossible to use. That's such a short cord on them too, that I can't even like really put the Prime Puss in her perch very well. There, that's the best vantage point. That's why it's there. My keyboard is covered in cat hair now. Like absolutely spammed with it. We got to get the brush in here. All right. I'm going to go to Mudbay or something and get a brush today and bring it back and put it here because this is insane. There is cat hair everywhere. And mind you, I brushed her yesterday. Or maybe it was the day before. It's been 1 or 2 days since the brushing, like extensive brushing. All right, so so I think this is a case of people were saying that basically what we want to do here is, since we require OpenGL 3 when we actually do our startup, that we shouldn't check for the parameter this one. So OpenGL arb frame buffer object yeah. So this code here, where we look to see whether OpenGL, like this nonsense, is apparently a problem because what happens is that the OpenGL 3.0 contexts on Mac don't report that they have it, even though they do because it's part of 3.0. And so the idea here was, since we're requiring 3.0 anyway, with the, when we do the major version, maybe we could just do it the same way, in fact, that we're doing this, right? So we could say something like, if major version is greater than or equal to 3, and we don't care what the minor version is, right? So if the major version is more than 3, no matter what, then we just always say that we have this. Right? So that would just bypass the, it would still do the check, but it bypasses any ill effects from the check in the case where we have reason to believe that the major version is larger. And so, I'll just say, okay. So what else we got? Win32 renderer test asserts because it can't find the frame buffer. We'll have to take a look at what that is. Again, these are on other platforms, I believe. We've got a that old Windows full screen bug here. I'm just gonna pop all these open so we can look at them sequentially. All right. This one resurfaced. We'll have to take a look at that. Martin's pointed out, in case there are no ops in the texture op queue, size available does not have the most optimal value. Current code looks like this, where each block calculates size available, but else branch will overwrite size available in case transfer is first used. It will have a smaller value than the actual memory available. This page could probably look like this. So let's go take a look at... Wait. What's the difference between these two lines? Oh, I see. It looks like we were missing an else. Right? He's saying you should do an else because otherwise you're going to hit this bottom block. So I probably forgot to put the else in there. That may have been what we were anticipating, but we screwed up, right? So let's take a look at begin texture op here and just see what's up. So here's the code. Yeah, I mean, we're not touching this, so that I feel like this was just dumb. I feel like that's probably what we meant. And we screwed it up, right? So thank you, Martins. I don't think we need to really check that too much because that almost certainly is what I probably meant to do, and I just screwed it up. So let me just double check that we don't hit anything weird as a result, but all right, maybe not. So we get an assertion that the transfer memory used So I take it back. Maybe there is something else going on here. Too bad Martins isn't watching. But so it's hard to page all this back into my brain because it's been a long time since we looked at it. But we're taking wherever the last place is in the transfer queue that we used, and we're saying that's where we're going to put this thing. If we're at the outset, right? If we're starting this is the very first transfer. Well, that's not really true. It could be either. It's either that there's no transfers outstanding or we've used them all up. So we just look to see what the op count is, and if the op count is 0, we assume it's that, right? So, okay. So basically, this is the exact... So wait, I don't know. This actually does seem... to be the case. Because if this size available does end up being used for this, right? You do like I guess that's really the only thing that would have to happen, right? So I think Martins is right, but you need to do this. Because if you're going to transfer if you're going to use the entire memory, you have to then reset the pointer back to the beginning in order to, because otherwise you would, yeah, you're somewhere random in the buffer and you're going to fill the, and you're saying you could fill the whole thing, but you have to reset back to the beginning, right? So I think that's the correct fix. So he's right that the structure should have had the else, but it also needs to have you rewind, because otherwise it won't work, right? So I think that's the correct solution. All right. So now we've got input stream parameter not used in Win32 get input file location. Interesting. I'm going to look at that one second. Oops. The reason is that the width and height of the texture that we create for the color attachment are both 0 because RenderDim hasn't been configured in the frame settings. I added this assert. A 0 width and height results a GL frame buffer incomplete attachment. Interesting. So let's look at create frame buffer. So first, let's get the assertion to fire. And then maybe we'll nerf it so that if it does get asked to do that, it won't do it. So I'm assuming you would have to provoke this. Because we don't have that happen in our code. So let's take a look at the render test, I guess. Maybe that one does. So in the build render test, I don't know where this is supposed to run, but probably there. There we go. So what we need to do here is make sure that this obeys the same stuff in the render test as we do outside it, right? And the render width and render height here, I guess the problem is the change to settings call is happening before anyone has actually told it how big it should be, right? Yeah. So, yeah. So in here, we need to set those values, but for whatever reason, it looks like they aren't getting set. Is that just because these come back as 0? I'm going to compile in debug mode, by the way. So those both get set. So how is it possible? Why are we not calling like some kind of initialization that was supposed to get called here? Where are those values coming from? they are coming from settings, render dim. So did we not set the settings? It's the settings that we are passing here, right? So it's OpenGL current settings and command settings. It's this one that we care about. So the commands, the settings in the command set are the ones we care about, and I guess those never get set. So inside here, these are not getting set, I guess. So for example, in here where we create some commands, we do OpenGL begin frame. Apparently, like, the render dim just isn't set. So inside the Win32 Handmade OpenGL code, well, I guess more in the Win32 Handmade code, we must set the render dim ourselves here. Yeah. So what we presumably want to do, I would guess, is when you actually call begin frame, we should probably pass them both, right? Meaning that begin frame call here, where we've got the rectangle 2i draw region and the window width, window height, that code probably wants to set the render dimension itself. So in addition to these, we would also want to pass the render dimension. So we'd have window and render dimensions, I would think. Looking at the window dim, that's really just used for the final viewport stuff, so that's fine. So I think I'm going to go ahead and change that. So what I want to do here is say, let's suppose that like OpenGL begin frame, that is something that has to happen. Let me look at the renderer platform definition here. So this call here, the renderer begin frame part of things. I wonder why. Is there a reason that these don't use this stuff? Like, is there a reason that this isn't this? Anyone know? Oh, because it cracks. That's why. I see. So when we actually record that callback, we're going to actually have a pass-through here. So the window width and the window height, we can pass those in, and we also need the render width and the render height when we do a begin frame. And so in here, right, we've got to do a render dim with render dim height, right? And so if we look at what that frame, what those render commands actually look like, this is actually already a V2U. And so I feel like we should just have like render dim. Those two should just get passed as vectors, right? So in here, we should just do this, and then we assign them. So there's the render dim. There's the OS window dim, right? So I think that's what we would rather do. And then we can follow the white rabbit backwards Oops. And figure out how to fix that. Okay, so OpenGL begin frame has a forward declaration somewhere. Here it is. So what we want to do here is say we've got a v2u, v2u, like so. And then we should get an assignment issue right here. So what we want to do here is say os window dim, render dim, and then the renderer begin frame call, that actually now needs to be updated. So where we define that call, and then that has everything we need, we'll call it a day, right? Okay. So now the places where we call this are wrong, but that's okay. So what we can do here is say, well, you know, here's the window, and then the render dim. I don't know. Did anyone actually ever specify what the render dim was? So I guess we were just rendering. We were expecting to render at the dimension of the draw region, probably. I mean, I don't know what we want to do there. So maybe what we say is we say like render dim So when we do aspect ratio fit, what we'll say is render dim width, render dim height, and that way this will all like flow through properly. So we probably should have done that to begin with, but you know, for whatever reason we didn't. Okay, so this wants to take the render dim as well, and there it goes. And then we need to do the same thing here. So dimension width and dimension height is the window dimension. That is already a v2u, so that can just come in here. And then now we can pass render dim instead. And I think that gets us everything that we needed. So now, maybe, possibly, we can fix this error. Let's take a look. Oops. First of all, let me actually run Handmade here and make sure that we've got that. We didn't screw it up. Not great. What did I do wrong there? We're passing render dim to begin frame, and so OpenGL begin frame should, right? Set that. And that's all we were doing here. So this should have been equivalent, but it wasn't. Why wasn't it? Oops. Right? I mean, that should have worked just fine, but it didn't. So let's take a look at why not. So that looks like it's all set properly. Which is what we would expect. When we come in here, we're going to read that out of there, and we're going to read... Oh, no! I was supposed to set that. Sorry about that, guys. My bad. How was that? Okay, so I was confused. I was a little bit confused about that to begin with. So if the render dim's in the settings, then why did I add it here? I don't know. I must have just been kind of spacing out there. Right? So I guess I kind of see why we didn't do that. It's because that we almost need a call for that. Because so in here, well, I guess not really. I mean, you can just pass it down every time, right? And it should be fine. So I guess that's fine. So I think we're all good there. And let's see what happens with the render test. So still not right. Although we don't really know if that has anything to do with what we broke, right? That could be something else. But we did fix that crash. So we should probably take a look at that as well. So I think we've done most of these. We're gonna have to look at that one though, and we'll take a look at that later. This seems like we... I don't actually know... So I guess the problem there is the render test is probably not updated to use the new locations of assets. That may be the entirety of it. If you look at like where it defines like what it should actually be loading, right? You can see this stuff. But I don't think we've got any of that anymore, right? I guess that was inside the test directory. So I could just go grab it. Probably somewhere in here? No, maybe not. Like, I don't know where... Okay, so it was in here, right? So probably what we want to do is inside the sources directory, we probably want to put that now. So like in here, we can put renderer test. And then this thing, I don't know how it like does its pathing, but we probably have to just start it in that directory, right? Yeah, because it's just whatever. It just does whatever, right? So we'll put that in there, and then we'll say like, okay, the render test starts in sources renderer test. Is that what it's called? Yeah. And we'll save that into our debug directory. Nope. Handmade debug Win32 renderer test. And now we're good. Yes. So let's double check that the release build still works, and then we'll go to a brief Q&A. Off we go. That seems good. No real issues there. Everything's fine. And let me go ahead and load Handmade and make sure everything's fine there. It looks good. And so I think we're all good. So we're just down to 2 issues in the issue stream. Well, 3. So these guys right here. And these 2 should be pretty trivial. This one's going to be bad because this is like a Windows 7 compat bug. So we'll see about that, but we're getting closer. All right. So that was good. It's always good to do some spring cleaning, get those to-dos out. Hey, Bubinga, you still with us? Good. That's good, girl. That's good, girl. You're going to get all those crows someday. You're going to get them all. Will you do all the platform layers or leave that to the community support? We'll definitely do some platform layers. It just depends when we're done which ones make sense. You know what I'm saying to you? But we're going to do some ourselves, whether we do them all or not. There'll probably be some platform layers community people do that we don't do, you know. But will you add some randomness to the sizes and maybe shapes of the trees? Yeah, we'll definitely do some randomness there, but exactly how we're going to do that, I'm not quite sure yet. How we want that to work. At the moment, each entity has a size parameter, so we vary that, and we'll probably vary the colors a little as well. What do you think about using the mouse wheel in order to drag values in the editor? I think it also doesn't work because obviously pens don't have a mouse wheel, right? So, and if you're making something that an artist might need to use, don't use a mouse wheel, right? Are we doing more meow hash later tonight? I don't know. I mean, we gotta go do a little bit more investigation, but man, that was depressing. Some of the problem is probably just meow bench, so getting rid of that would be good, but it's not great. So. Having just dealt with weighted distributions and cumulative sum draw, will you add weighted selection to the tree selection? Some trees may show up more or less common. So not for variance. Variants are supposed to be interchangeable. the other parameters that actually are not interchangeable, so for example, whether or not tree has snow on it, whether or not it's fall or spring or whatever, those will all be pulled from actual distributions that are based on what's trying to be created. But the idea behind variants is that we don't have any information about them. That's what a variant is. It's one that we have literally no idea. So we could put a distribution in for them that is not even, but it's unclear what it would be. Because since we have no information, we don't know that we should pick one more often than another one, right? So it's a little bit hard to say. We could do something where the artist can weight the distribution or something, because that's not hard for us to do. But again, I'm gonna have to wait till I see an actual like need for it. I'm not gonna probably do that without some more information, right? Since we're producing equi-spaced variant points now, it's really easy for us to weight our randomized distributions towards something. But yeah, I don't have a use case in mind for that at the moment. So it would have to wait till we actually had something to do. All right. Too much late night meow hash. That was just awful. If you were on the stream last night, that was just terrible. That was just depressing. That was just depressing programming, is what that was. Wolverinegator. Left click normal speed, right click double speed, dragging, or some modifier key that the pen also has. Yeah, I mean, we could, but I don't know. I just feel like maybe we'd want to just put a widget on there. That way you can just grab it and it just works, you know? And that seems better to me. Depression-oriented programming. That is a great term. We should coin two new terms: DOP, which is depression-oriented programming, and OOP, which is oppression-oriented programming, which is like when you have to program in C++, right? I have watched an older episode where you were coding player movement related to a moving translation point. Will there be any in-game elements using this mechanic? I'm not sure I understand what you mean. Are the monsters from Anna Draws It going to be in Handmade Hero? No. What mechanic are you referring to? Are you just talking about the collision detector? And the answer is probably not. Because since we are hopping only, we can't really use that. It doesn't really do anything. Or I should say we just don't need it, because the logic-oriented collision is what we actually want. We will use collision detection to determine when like projectiles or the fist hits things. So collision detection will happen, but the moving moving translation points. Oh. Are you just talking about um are you talking about like the fact that this guy's on a point right now and this thing it's on could be moving around? Because the answer is yes, we may do something with that, right? There may be like rotating pieces that you hop on and go around. Do you know what I mean? So yes. Yes. If that's what you're talking about, yes, we probably will do some stuff with that. And we will also do some rooms that have non-grid layouts, probably, as well, right? So there will be stuff like that for sure. What's your go-to method to hide a string in a project? I guess it depends on how hard you want it to be hidden. Like, if you're just trying to hide it from somebody who's going to run strings on the executable, then it's not hard. I mean, you can do anything, rot 13 it or anything you want, right? Anything will hide it. XOR it with something. Set the hide bit on every ASCII value, right? So if you're just trying to hide a string from somebody who's just like searching the executable for strings, that's trivial. If you're trying to hide a string from somebody so that like they literally can't find it, like they are going to disassemble the program and step through it and try to find these strings, and you don't want them to find them, well then that's kind of that's a lot harder, right? That's like sort of a different level of scrutiny. And I would say at that point you're looking at things like trying to like have very diffuse parts of the code pull bits of the string and like recombine them at different points in the code that are non-obvious and stuff, right? I mean, the best thing to do if you're looking for information about that kind of thing is I would go watch old videos about how people implemented copy protection, because that's what you're basically doing. And just instead of trying to prevent the game from being pirated, you're trying to prevent the game from having string data exposed. And so you'd want to do all the same crap, right? Like all the same anti-piracy crap where you're trying to hide the checks for whether or not the disk is authentic and all that stuff. That's what you're trying to do. So you're trying to you're just going to want to like go look at that extensive history of techniques and think along those lines, because that's what they were trying to do, right? That's what the anti-piracy people were trying to do. They're trying to prevent leakage of a piece of data, and that piece of data was how it was determining whether it was an authentic copy. And so most of that same stuff can be applied to hiding a string. Okay. Oops. Didn't mean to draw a little dot there. Thank you, everyone, for joining me for the episode of Handmade Hero. It's been a pleasure coding with you, as always. If you would like to follow the series at home, you can always pre-order the game at handmadehero.org, and it comes with a source code, which you can play around with at home. And now, as of today, for the first time in a while, we have a complete distribution that should now be up to date forever, because we can just update the art assets. Where you can rebuild the whole art asset data pack, including even the fonts, automatically. So you should be able to go immediately up to speed if you wanted to build the game as it is at the moment. So that's a good thing, and we want to do that for a while, but we just weren't done with. We never really quite got around to finishing the art asset pipeline. We now kind of have, and the art pipeline's actually decent. It still needs some work, but it's pretty darn good at this point. And so I will be uploading. In addition to today's code build, I'll be uploading a graphics zip, which folks can test out as well. That's about it for today. I will be off next weekend because I am not in town, but we will be back the following weekend, when I think we'll start on a new thing. Maybe we'll try to do the ground cover and get that system in place, because that's a big push that does a bunch of things too that I wanted to do separately, and also I may do like ground cover and lighting at the same time because they're actually interrelated in ways that maybe not obvious, but they will become more obvious when I work on them. I'll show you. Anyway, so thanks for joining me. Sorry I won't be around next weekend. Hopefully everyone will have some programming they can do on their own. We are covered in cat hair here, so that's always good. Maybe you're covered in cat hair where you are too. Kind of spilled that one. Have a good free weekend next weekend, and I'll see you the weekend after. Take it easy, everybody.